Well, I'm really thankful that I'm here, but I want to tell you I'm really thankful you're here. Can I tell you why? Would that be okay? I can just tell you why I'm glad you're here. I do have a tendency to be soft-spoken because my line of work is usually not speaking out. It's actually in very close settings when you're working with people in pain. So I have a tendency to have a therapist voice, so I don't have necessarily a public speaking voice. The other tendency I have is when I want to really illustrate a point and I get really passionate about it, it's usually because I'm moved and I actually get softer.
Oh.
My pastor says you do the opposite, and yet people still lean in because they want to hear what you're saying. But I'm trying to overcome that, but I tend to get really more softer than I do get louder. So I just need to let you know, if you need to hear me, this is about as loud as I'm going to get. You might want to move closer, okay? I just want you to do that, okay? Let me tell you why I'm glad you're here. So it's a little bit of a history lesson, okay? In 1981, as a graduate of Point Loma, my first job was in the trauma center of Scripps Memorial Hospital, where I spent 3 years, and I was anticipating going into field of medicine, and began to work a lot with people in pain, right? They're coming in for emergency surgeries and other things like that. And I continued to work in the area of counseling or getting training in counseling because I thought I want to be the kind of person people feel comfortable talking to. Right? In 1984, I joined the staff at the McDonald Center where I began to work with adolescents with addictions. It was the first treatment program specifically for addictions with adolescents in San Diego County. There were other dual diagnosis type programs, but it was the only one that was a pure model. And when you're working with people in pain, you want to know that there's resources and referrals for people that are in pain. And right? You want to be able to say, okay, we can't help you here, but here's some places where you can go. Some of us may remember July 18th, 1984, and if you don't, that's fine. But on July 18th, 1984, something happened here in San Diego County. A gentleman walked into a McDonald's in San Ysidro and opened fire and killed 21 people and injured 19 others. 21 people just south of here were massacred in a McDonald's restaurant. And I was about 25 at the time. And the secular community of San Diego were pouring their hearts out to these people. And I couldn't wait to go to church that day to find out what my church was going to do. And so I sat there and I waited. And I waited. And I waited. And it didn't even get a mention. Now here's where, you hear me getting softer? This is where I should get louder, right? You're probably using, and they didn't even get a mention.
There you go.
There we go. I need a word. I need that. It didn't even get a mention. And my friend was the associate pastor. And I went up to him and I said, Jim, what are we doing? What are we doing? The entire county, secular community, is pouring their hearts out to people, and we don't have an answer? We don't have a response? What are we doing? And at that point, I had to take an inventory, and I prayed about it and said, Lord, I got to be at a place where they're not the frozen chosen, where they're being the hands and feet, the ears too, the mouth, you know. That and there was I won't give the church a plug, but at that time in 1984, they had a survivors of suicide support group.
Wow.
They had a grief support group, they had a divorce support group, and they had a recovery support group in 1984. And let me tell you folks, you can just take my word for it, you can go back and do the research. That wasn't being done too many places. Very few places had that. And I'm a firm believer, and I think you already know I'm preaching to the choir. Jesus, people will come to Jesus through the front door, right? That's when they walk into a service. They might come through a side door. They might come through a window because of the different ministries that you have, right? Sometimes it's a children's ministry. A kid starts going to Sunday school or they're in some kind of drama, and the dad's going to come along just because he wants to see his kid. I have 2 or 3 friends that came to know the Lord that way because they wanted to go see their kid, and they finally decided, well, maybe this isn't so bad, right? And sometimes, as we'll talk about in a minute, they even come to the Lord through the roof, right? Remember that story? So this is why I'm so glad you're here, because this is really exciting when you look back. It wasn't that long ago. I know it's a long time ago, 30 years, but still, to see where the church has grown in terms of lay counseling and really equipping people to really meet the needs of the folks that are coming in your doors. And I'm seeing more and more of that now. I'm thankful that my church has a number of support groups as well. We just started one for parents with students or with children with Asperger's on the autistic spectrum, which is pretty profound too. We're seeing more and more of that. So you with me? Are you glad you're here too?
Yes.
So that's why I'm really glad you're here. So let me talk a little bit about what we're going to cover. I'm hoping we can get through all this, and I appreciate a little shot in the arm for me to kind of get louder because I feel it coming on now. So, the one thing I want to say is that learning through conversation, I want you to have the freedom. I do try to like to dialogue a little bit, and I actually get to teach graduate psychology, so I like to have conversations with students and have you participate. We're going to try and do a little bit of that, but I also want you to have the freedom to have the inarticulate moment. You know what that is? That's when you just try and say something kind of spontaneous and you don't have it well thought out. Because sometimes what we do, I don't know if you're one of these kind of folks, I know I am. Sometimes I'm trying to get my wordsmithed in just the right way so I sound somewhat intelligent. But the moment passes. By the time you want to say something, and you might have something really valuable to contribute, it's gone by and we've missed it. I really believe in some of the things that you have to say. And sometimes you ever had that example where you say something and you're not sure it's put out just right, and somebody else, I think you were trying to say this, and you go, yes, that's it. Well, that's a contribution. So I want you to know that I want you to have that freedom, but it's because I also want you to have that freedom myself, right? So I want this to be a safe place where you can at least talk about some of the things that you've experienced yourself, perhaps, in working with some of these folks with addiction. I'm going to have a few soapbox moments. You know what those are, right? Those moments I reserve. I've finally given myself permission after 30 years working in this particular field to say, you know what, I do think I have something to say, and it's based on my experiences. So occasionally you'll see those come through, and I hope you'll tolerate them, but I'm hoping there's something that you'll learn from that, okay? And then we're going to talk about the 4 men and the paralytic, and then we're going to do some group and individual exercises. Maybe go over a few stats, a few myths and realities, or truth or false situations related to addiction, and then talk about what is addiction really. We're going to go over some of the symptoms and who's at risk, and I don't know if we'll get the common struggles that they face, but I am going to talk a few things about what you can take away and how you might be able to help them. But my hope is that you really have a different understanding, perhaps a different understanding. Some of you may already know this area pretty well. But I'm hoping that you'll have a different understanding of the folks that struggle with addictions as a result of our talk this morning when you leave here. Okay? We good? All right. So, here's a story you might be familiar with in Mark 2, 1-12. It says, a few days later when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralyzed man carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then lowered the mat the man was lying on. Can you imagine that? That's pretty incredible. Digging through a roof. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there, thinking to themselves, why does this fellow talk this way? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to the paralyzed man, your sins are forgiven, or say, get up, take your mat, and walk? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So he said to the man, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. And this amazed everyone. And they all said, we've never seen anything quite like that. That's one of my favorite stories. And the thing that kind of hit me about it is, when I've read that story in the past, I've kind of grown up, I'm thankful that I've grown up in a family that didn't just go to church, but did their best to live it out. They weren't perfect, but they did their best to live it out. But what you know how you can hear a story over and over again, and there's probably stuff in here I still haven't seen. When I read that story, I only saw it as 4 friends. But it didn't say that. It was just 4 guys who were probably lived on his block, right? And I thought that was powerful. This, by the way, is I think the 2nd or 3rd intervention, maybe the 4th. Anybody familiar with the term intervention? This was an intervention, right? It doesn't say he wanted to get well. It could have been one of the guys said, and it says we don't know what the source of his paralysis was. Do you know people who are paralyzed by something and they don't know that they want to get well? In psychology terms, we call that learned helplessness. You ever heard that term before? That they, no matter what they've tried or feel that they've tried, nothing's ever worked, so they are content just to stay in this little corner because you're so fearful and disappointed. It could be this guy, right? We don't know that he wanted to get well, and this it could have been one guy. Joe goes to his other friends and say, "Hey, you know Fred down in the corner? You know, he just been paralyzed for all those years. I saw this guy Jesus. Let's go take him." Because it says because of their faith, but we don't know if it was their collective faith or just they're all having faith that Joe knew that that Jesus could help him, right? So that's one of the reasons why I like this story. And also the other thing I thought I liked about it, and this goes into the whole area of counseling, Jesus knew in his spirit what they were thinking in their hearts. And I think that obviously we know Jesus can obviously discern an awful lot of things that we can't. But I think the role of counselors, you learn to listen to people, and oftentimes when you have enough information, you can understand what's underneath some of their behavior, what's underneath some of their thoughts, and why they feel certain ways and why they behave in certain ways. So that's another reason why I'm glad you're here and why I like this story. So here's something I thought about having you guys do in a small group. But if you feel safe enough, I'm just going to ask this by like a show of hands perhaps. Have you personally been impacted by alcoholism or drug addiction? Family member, someone you love or care about struggled, that's kind of implied. So that's even closer. I mean, sometimes it's a distant friend, but this is even closer. And then lost a family member or alcohol, to the alcohol or substances. Well, I really appreciate you taking that risk. And you know, sadly, I'd like to say it surprises me, but it really doesn't. This is a devastating illness. And then the other thing I was curious about, just to kind of get a sense of it, and this would be something I'd probably have you do at your table and then report back to me. But for the sake of time, as a Rock Care counselor, what do you think are the barriers that you have or see in helping somebody with addiction? This is where you just toss it out. What do you see as something that you think can get in your way? They could either do something that gets in your way, or would you yourself think this is something that could get in my way?
Deception.
Deception? Their deception.
Their deception.
Right.
Received.
Deception. Dishonesty. I don't have any understanding of that whatsoever. I mean, alcoholics and addicts can be dishonest. Huh? There is a joke that they tell about themselves, right? You know that one, right? How do you tell when an alcoholic is lying? When their lips move, right? It's an old saying. It's also said about attorneys, but I don't go there. Some people would say politicians, but I think it's really, that's a very common joke even in the field of recovery. Okay, so deception might be something. What else? What else do you think might get?
Not having or knowing or any experience with an addiction or addictive behavior. Or
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
not really understanding what that is. I mean, culturally, because I remember I'm from Barbados, and originally, people would say, "Well, just get over it," or handle it. What's wrong with you? And,
Just get over it.
you're weak.
Stop.
Wish it were that simple. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Right.
not.
We're going to talk a little bit about why this can be such a struggle.
Yeah.
Okay. Addiction. We're gonna touch on that a little bit. Mm-hmm.
What I see is if the individual is not aware or accepting of his addiction,
Yeah.
that is a big barrier for me.
That's a real difficult. And that comes to the issue of boundaries and how far do I go before I realize I've exhausted any avenue I have towards trying to provoke or get underneath their denial, right? That's what intervention is designed about. We're not going to talk about intervention, but really intervention was actually created by a gentleman by the name of Vernon Johnson, who is himself a Presbyterian pastor. Did you know that? He wrote the book, I'll Quit Tomorrow. And you guys have all heard about intervention now, right?
Yeah.
But back then, when he created it, it was considered very innovative. And he thought, how can we speak the truth in love in a way that gets underneath their defenses?
Yeah.
And it's always done when somebody's sober, not when you're drinking, because you can't speak nonsense to a nonsensible. I mean, you can't speak sense to a nonsensical person, because the only sense that makes sense to them is their own nonsense. So that's why it doesn't work if you're not if they're not sober. So yeah, if they're in denial, and you know what? That's the other thing. Well, just for a second here, we'll touch on. Boundaries is something that you have to know about. What even in the field of counseling, right? And self-care is really important. How do you take care of